Today we have with us Professor David M. Bird. David M. Bird has a bachelor's in science with honors in zoology from the University of Guelph. He has a master in science of wildlife biology from McGill University and a PhD in wildlife biology from McGill University. Emeritus Professor of Wildlife Biology at McGill University in Montreal, Quebec. He's co-authored over 200 peer-reviewed papers, supervised 50 graduate students, mostly on birds of prey, and has written and or edited more than a dozen nature books. David is the past president of the Raptor Research Foundation and the Society of Canadian Ornithologists. He has earned several awards for his research and education efforts. Besides his innumerable public lectures and radio and television appearances, he contributes regularly to BWD and Canadian Wildlife Magazine. And today we're going to be talking about birds of prey and their relationships with pigeons and all the stuff that's involved there. So thanks for coming on to talk today, David.
My great pleasure, Philip.
Like with pigeons, there are different breeds of birds of prey, and people will see different ones based on their location geographically. Would it be correct to say that they migrate and everybody gets a little bit of each one, or is there just certain birds of prey in certain areas?
Yeah, it's the latter actually, because I mean, if you look at a field guide showing all the different birds of prey and go anywhere in North America, then I know there's pigeon fanciers all over the world for that matter. In North America, which I know best, there's the basic birds like peregrine falcons, for example, and merlins and kestrels are the most common three falcons that you might find anywhere south of the tree line. And then for hawks, you've got the two different kinds. You've got the soaring hawks like red-tailed hawks and red-shouldered hawks, broad-winged hawks, and so on. And then you've got the accipiter hawks, which are the true forest hawks, and those are the northern goshawk, which is the biggest. And then you've got the Cooper's hawk, and then you've got the sharpshin hawk. And in each of those three species, well, all birds of prey, the females are bigger than the males, sometimes by as much as a third. But what's interesting about the goshawks, Cooper's hawks, and sharpshin hawks is that the female northern goshawk is the biggest, and then you get down to a male, which is smaller, and then you get into a female Cooper's hawk, and there's some overlap in size between those two birds. And then down to the much smaller sharpshin hawk, and the whole thing is designed so that those birds don't compete with each other by taking the same prey. It's also safe to say that there's no way that a sharpshin hawk is likely going to tackle a full-grown pigeon. It's not impossible if the pigeon is somehow impaired in some way, but more than likely it's going to be the Cooper's hawk that's going to take pigeons. Because goshawks, for example, really don't. I mean, other than cities like Hamburg, Germany, and so on, where there's an actual urban population, in North America, you'll not find goshawks too often in city environments. But Cooper's hawks, absolutely, they are the velociraptors of the birds of prey.
So that's interesting. You hear a lot of talk, especially in the cities, where these are supposed to be migratory birds, and a lot of guys are saying that they're not migrating because they have a food source in that area, so they'll just stick around, and then that's that. Can you explain like some of the hunting patterns, behaviors of the birds of prey that are in the city areas?
The two main ones that I think pigeon fanciers have to worry about are peregrine falcons and probably Cooper's hawks. I don't think that American kestrels and merlins are going to be too worrisome for full-grown pigeons. Peregrines and Cooper's hawks hunt in two totally different ways. The peregrine, they're both bird eaters. The peregrines are most likely to basically fly around at quite a height, and then they look for prey below. Could be a pigeon trying to return to the loft or whatever. And then they'll often dive out of the sun, just like fighter pilots did in World War II and other wars, so that they can't be seen, and basically strike the pigeon or whatever prey bird it's going after. Some say that there's a lot of debate among falconers and raptor lovers about exactly what transpires when a peregrine falcon hits a pigeon. Sometimes at speeds of over 300 kilometers an hour. Whether it's some have suggested it's the breastplate of the peregrine. I don't buy that. I think it's more likely the halix, the hind talon of the foot, nails that pigeon so strongly that it's probably dead before it hits the ground. Cooper's hawk, on the other hand, is more of a, as I said, velociraptor, and they're very smart in their hunting techniques, and they'll sometimes even land on the opposite side of a roof where there's a bunch of pigeons roosting, and then they'll basically sort of waddle over and around the edge and then come whipping around in a hell of a hurry and send the pigeons scattered into flight, and then pick one that can catch the easiest. Usually the one that's either the slowest or dim-witted or whatever. The way they're shaped, they have short rounded wings and long tails, as opposed to the peregrines, which have long pointed wings. Basically, those short rounded wings and long tails allow them to sprint over short distances very fast. And so they can often overtake something like a pigeon if it's a short distance. But once the pigeon gets going, then it's hard for a Cooper's hawk to catch it.
Definitely some amazing predators.
Oh no, they definitely are. They've actually amazed human beings for several thousand years, and that's why humans have been engaging in the practice of falconry.
What can someone do as far as modifying their loft or their enclosure to make it less appealing for birds of prey, or maybe, even just safer for their own pigeons?
Well, I'd like to start off answering that question by just saying that even though I absolutely love birds of prey, I've studied them for over 45 years. At one point in my life, and this is not a boast, but I was probably among the top 10 guys in the world studying them. I also have liked pigeons. I had a couple when I was young at university level that I stayed in my apartment with me, Ublio and Arrow, I called them. They weren't fancy ones like tumblers or tipplers and so on, but they were just feral pigeons that I had found. And I've always, had an admiration for them. I love looking at the colors, the different colors of pigeons. My favorite ones are the reddish ones. Anyway, all this to say that I've also defended pigeons many times. We both know that there are people that refer to them as rats with wings. Doesn't matter whether they're your tame fancy flying pigeons or a pigeon in the street or whatever. And I've always disagreed with that label, and I've defended pigeons many times in articles. But on the other hand, if someone's trying to feed birds in their backyard and they do it rather sloppily and attract pigeons to the backyard, that makes me nervous because town councilors and neighbors and so on do not have a good appreciation for pigeons, and then they'll pass bylaws outlawing bird feeding. So that's kind of where I stand with the pigeons. I fully appreciate what you guys do with them, with the breeding of them and the flying of them and so on. But in terms of, I'm trying to think if I was into that and keeping a loft of either racing pigeons that could make me a lot of money in races, or just the tumblers and so on. The first thing I would probably do is make sure that my loft had some sort of a cover on the top. In other words, you see things in the movies where someone's got a pigeon loft on the top of a skyscraper or whatever, and it's just nothing but a big open cage, made out of lumber with well, maybe a little bit more sturdy than chicken wire. But I would definitely make sure that if a raptor was flying over, like a peregrine or even a Cooper's hawk flying low over the buildings, I would make sure they couldn't easily see a loft with a bunch of prey in it, because they're going to clock that and they're going to say, there's a food source. I'll come back another time and see if I can nail one of those. That's the first thing I would do. I don't know the exact designs that pigeon fanciers are using these days, but certainly when you let your birds go out to do their flights or whatever, having a very easy way for them to come into the loft, a well lit loft so they can see their way if they're being chased by a hawk or whatever. I mean, a Cooper's hawk, is different from a peregrine. A peregrine's not going to go zipping right into the loft after a pigeon, but a Cooper's hawk might. There's a very famous story, Philip, in a book on pioneer days when a Cooper's hawk chased after a chicken on a farmyard, and it actually flew up ran up under the skirts of a pioneer woman to get that chicken. It's a very famous but true anecdote. I've used it in articles myself. So that's how determined they can be. They will actually run down prey birds into thick bushes, and they're very good at compressing their feathers. They can go through the smallest of holes. You can go on YouTube and watch goshawks and Cooper's hawks. You can watch them being trained to fly through holes in plexiglass when they show slow motion how the bird compresses its feathers, and all in one motion goes right through that hole. And so you need to have certainly a way for the pigeons to get into their loft in a heck of a hurry. Not necessarily going to stop a Cooper's hawk, but probably it's not likely that you're going to find Cooper's hawks going on the tops of skyscrapers in any case.
Yeah, that's interesting you said that, because I've seen bobs where the pigeons can trap in and the bobs drop down so they can't come back out.
Okay.
And so in some ways I'd be like, well, maybe that would be the doorway, right? Where the pigeon knows how to use it, but the bird of prey
Yes.
can't. But there has been I've seen people post pictures where it's like, yeah, the BOP went through the bobs and then got inside and caused a lot of headaches.
Oh yeah.
So you're also talking about covering it. So even like the aviary. So if you got a loft and then you have an aviary, it's probably a good idea just to put a cover over that too. So if something is flying overhead, it doesn't look down there and see a bunch of a big food source.
That makes perfectly good sense to me. I would certainly do that. Could be a tarp, could be
Mhm.
just a solid roof on it, or it could be maybe you could get something like old Christmas trees or Christmas tree boughs or whatever, and lash them onto the top if you wanted something looking a little anything that breaks up the obvious vision of a bunch of pigeons sitting in a cage waiting to be nailed by a predator that can get in there.
So what other visual deterrents, right? There's so much stuff you see online, reflective tape, fake owls, those streamers, spinning reflectors.
Mhm.
Are any of those right there useful to kind of deter away, or is there something better?
What I did when you presented me with some questions is I went to three different places to find out how they deter birds of prey. One of them is airports, because birds of prey can sometimes get sucked into jet engines, and they do visit airports because there are prey there, ducks and gulls and so on. And also people who feed birds in the backyard. I'm one of them. How do we deter hawks from coming in the backyard? And the third one is if I've got a poultry flock, how do I keep birds of prey from coming into, say I've got free ranging chickens and then there's no roof over the cage? How do I keep the hawks from coming in? So I went to all three of those different places to look and see what those groups of people were doing. It's not an easy thing. I can tell you right now that putting up those CDs and reflective tape and so on, they might work temporarily or on maybe on a bright sunny day. The idea behind them, for example, is that birds of prey, like and crows, for example, and ravens, have been shot at and persecuted for decades, years ago, before protective laws were brought in. And of course, the idea behind the shiny light or whatever is, of course, light reflecting off a gun, a gun barrel or whatever. And crows, for example, are smart enough to pick up on that. But the point is that I've done a lot of reading and writing about deterring hawks from coming after bird feeders, and that solution doesn't really stop them at all. I mean, maybe it's better to do that than nothing. It's the same thing with those plastic owls that one could buy. I wish I had a nickel for every one of those things that was sold around the world. Even my own university, Philip, asked me, said, look, we want to keep the pigeons off our buildings. They're pooping all over the buildings. Can we put up plastic owls? And I said, no, they won't work. I said, they'll work for a few days and that'll be the end of it. They didn't listen to me. And then the following spring, I had a great smug smile on my face as I walked around the campus and saw one of those plastic owls with a wire around its neck, and the thing was swinging back and forth in the wing, covered in pigeon poop. And so exactly, I mean, basically the pigeons would just simply sit on them after. It's the same with birds of prey. They're not going to be fooled by those kinds of things. So
Yeah.
so using up any kind of a bird of prey. But here are some things I thought if I was going to try some different techniques and things that I read about for chickens, for example. You can buy mannequins. Now, I know you can make, people have used blow up dolls, believe it or not, and so on, like life size blow up dolls, and then put dresses on them and wigs and so on. But I was thinking, if I wanted something that would last a lot longer than that, because eventually those things deflate and you wasted your money, is to go to a store and buy a mannequin, dress it up, even to make it move a little bit. You could mount it on some kind of like a dish or something that spins around nice and easily on a bit of a spindle, and so that it moves around in the wind. And then having a wig on it, like long hair, and a dress that flutters in the wind, that would probably work well if you didn't mind having that kind of thing near your loft. Not everybody would.
Yeah, that's good yard art.
Yeah, and that's true. Another thing I thought about, that people are using in some places, that when you go by car dealerships and so on, and they use those blow up effigies of humans that wriggle back and forth, those put on some sort of a timer, wouldn't be a bad idea to try. I'm just giving you that kind of the idea of a scarecrow sort of thing. Hanging up effigies, I know that people have tried to keep turkey vultures that are roosting nearby to coming into town. They hang effigies of dead turkey vultures. They kill them and hang them up there. And there has been some talk about that working, but of course, that's not something that I would want people to encourage, to hang up dead hawks and falcons around their lofts and so on, because that would mean killing birds. Another thing I thought about, well, what about the sound deterrence? I did some reading about those things, and it seems to still hold true today that hawks and falcons are really not deterred. Certainly, if you play alarm call, that could end up attracting Cooper's hawks and peregrines to your neighborhood or whatever. But those ultrasonic things you can buy, and they can go for sometimes thousands of dollars. They don't seem to work. I did some reading on scientific testing of those things, and they don't work. Some people say they repel rats and mice and so on, but they don't really work. And so I would not waste money on any of those kinds of things. I will say that there is a potential live solution to keeping, at least giving your pigeons warning that there's a hawk in the area, is to put in guinea fowl. I was just at a chicken coop in Baja, Mexico, with a bird watching group there, and they had 2 or 3 guinea fowl. And I know guinea fowl are excellent in detecting birds of prey. And then they make these warning calls, and the warning calls eventually are learned by all of the birds of the area that, hey, there's a raptor nearby, so let's not leave the loft or whatever. But that means an extra mouth to feed or whatever. But it's a possible solution that might work in some cases.
I've heard people say, "Oh, guineas make good alarms." We've had guineas in the past, and every now and then, if I walk around the corner of a building and I startle one, it definitely sets off an alarm and
Yeah.
definitely does its job. That's really interesting. I didn't know that they kept their eyes out for birds of prey too.
Birds of prey are actually one of their most greatest feared predator. Are the eagles that are in Africa in particular, where guinea fowl, 2 kinds of guinea fowl live. I've seen them over there. There are eagles over there that just love to feed on guinea fowl, but they have this warning system, so they're now highly attuned to them. So a lot of poultry flock owners will keep some guinea fowl among them. If you want a natural solution, that's one way to go.
Speaking of a natural solution, what about other birds like I think there's starlings or different varieties of small birds that you can put a little house up for that will either chase away the birds of prey?
I'm not aware that anyone's used that or tried that. I mean, I know starlings very, very well, and they are fairly smart birds or whatever. But and certainly they would be quite a prone prey bird for something like a Cooper's hawk. Not so much peregrine. Peregrine I usually like to kill things in the air, although they have been known to take rats in dumps, actually up in the Yukon, up in the north in Canada, probably as a last resort as opposed to killing birds. They really prefer to eat ducks and shorebirds and seabirds. Those are 3 main things. But they will take pigeons in cities, of course. And I know this because I released about 50 captive bred peregrine falcons in the city of Montreal with the intent of getting a pair going there now. And today, there used to be the famous sunlight birds there back in the 50s, where one female outlasted 3 males and raised 22 youngsters before dying at around 16 years of age or whatever. And so today there's probably at least 10 pairs of peregrines out there, which are that's probably not good news for people who are keeping pigeons like yourself. And I understand that, but it's a matter of trying to find a common ground somewhere where I can go to a city and other people who never get to see peregrine falcons anywhere else can appreciate wildlife and vote in politicians who care about wildlife. And so if they get to see a peregrine falcon, in the city, it's a big deal. But on the other hand, I do respect the fact that these peregrines will then become nuisances for people like yourself. And I remember during the height of the releases of peregrine falcons, the Watts district of Los Angeles, there was a great conflict between the pigeon fanciers there and the falconers that were releasing the birds there. I mean, physical confrontations. So I haven't heard of that more recently, but I had during around that same time, I remember hearing Ian Newton, who was one of the top bird of prey ecologists of our time. He gave a talk at a bird of prey conference at the Raptor Research Foundation. He showed a picture of his hands filled with the little plastic rings from pigeons that he had found in all of the peregrine falcon nests, not in the cities, but out in the wild in Scotland. like a whole double handful of these things. And these pigeons were literally, it was mostly racing pigeons. They would let these things go thousands and thousands at a time. And of course, peregrine falcons are going to say, "Oh boy, there's a buffet dinner for us."
Right.
And they would wait for them and then take them back and feed them to their babies. And of course, the rings would get left in the nest. I got contacted by a British professor, and he said, "Listen, I got a crazy idea. Do you think that we could do some research with my falcon colony?" I had a falcon colony of about 300 American kestrels, which I used for research, which was the subject of many of those scientific papers. "Do you think that we could actually get pigeon fanciers to dye their pigeons a certain color that basically tells peregrines that they're not going to taste good?" It's called aversive conditioning. And so we took these little yellow day-old cockerels, which are basic day-old chickens, right, that I fed my colony. And we would give kestrels, a big sample size, a choice between eating 4 different cockerels. One would be the yellow one, the normal color. Another would be blue. Another one was green. And I forget what the third color was. So we actually dyed 3 of the 4 different colors. And then we had these 2 chemicals we worked with that taste bad to birds. They're a known taste deterrents. And so what we try to do to see if the kestrels would avoid eating a bird, a cockerel, that tasted bad. And what we found out is that the only color that the kestrels avoided eating was blue. If there was a cockerel blue, then they would even eat the non-colored one if it had the bad tasting chemical in it. They would eat that before eating a blue cockerel. So we published that in the Journal of Raptor Research, but nothing ever came of it. No one ever bothered saying, "Well, let's think about dyeing our pigeons blue," or whatever. I mean, there's a little bit of that's not an easy thing for you to do. You like your pigeons, you like the looks of them and so on, and dyeing them a blue color is not necessarily the way to go. And it might not work for peregrines. It worked for these kestrels, but it might not work for peregrines. And so what happened after that kind of stuff got published, the pigeon fanciers, some of the more less desirable types, were actually using pigeons with explosives on them and remote devices like sacrificial pigeons to blow up the peregrine and the pigeon in the air. And some of them were affixing scalpel blades to the legs of some pigeons as well to harm the peregrines. That was about the height, I would say, of the animosity between pigeon fanciers and peregrine falcon lovers. I don't know if it's as heavy today. I don't hear these stories today like I did before. So maybe there's some common ground being found, I hope.
I know that in like especially like Southern California area where
Mm-hmm.
the Birmingham roller community is huge down there. They got the birds that roll in the air.
Yes.
They're way more of a flashing, I would just say like an easy meal for a bird of prey if they saw a bird tumbling like that.
Yep.
What a lot of the roller guys are saying is that, they just keep the birds of prey are not leaving. They don't migrate. They sit there, they
Mm-hmm.
reproduce. And so now it's just like some of these guys are breeding hundreds of birds just to keep enough to fly, an A team of 20 birds or whatever, because they're just getting hit every time they fly.
Yeah.
Would a bird of prey do that? Would a bird of prey not migrate if it has a constant food source?
That's what the birds in the cities are doing. A lot of the peregrine. The reason that we had peregrines use a nest box placed on a building in 1982 and 1984, they chose because there were several peregrines hanging around the city of Montreal in the middle of winter. And Montreal has in those days, some pretty icy, cold, snowy winters. But the peregrines were basically living off the various pigeons in the cities and so on. And then in the spring, when it was breeding season, they would sometimes not just take peregrines, but they would also take birds migrating through the city. So yeah, I think it's possible that, I mean, the 2 things that limit bird of prey populations are this. One of them is food supply, and the other one is nesting sites. And if they have both those things, then unless it's a totally hostile environment, like absolutely so cold, but even then, there are peregrines, falcons there. I mean, peregrine falcons are in the Arctic. So I'm not surprised about that. I did do some other reading about some of the things that other pigeon fanciers are trying. Is that there's 2 aspects. There's when you let your birds leave the loft, that you should alter that, like rotate it a little bit, so that the falcons and the Cooper's hawks don't get attenuated to when the birds are going to leave. Not everybody wants to do that because apparently pigeon fanciers like to have some consistency in when they let their birds go. So that's not an easy solution for them. And the other thing was, instead of putting up, I think you call them, is it a kit?
Oh, right. Yeah. Put up a kit of rollers. Yeah.
Like a kit of, say, 15 to 20 pigeons, put up only maybe 4 or 5 or 6 at a time. If you put up a lot of pigeons at one time, that's going to be more obvious to a peregrine or a Cooper's hawk than a small number of birds. It doesn't necessarily mean that it'll work, but certainly I know that based on the reading I did, is that people were losing less birds, but they just weren't getting to put out the flights that they'd like to put out, like the larger number of birds.
Right.
But they were losing less. So it all depends. It's all a matter of the balance, isn't it? Weighing it out of losing. When you lose a valuable bird to a bird of prey, one that maybe wins a lot of races or whatever, that could be a very expensive proposition.
And we've had success with mixing fly times as well. When my son was doing the rollers, he would every day after school turn them out. And we would look up in the sky. We got really wide open skies out here. Okay, there's nothing. And as soon as we turn them out, this dude just comes out of nowhere. He must have been so high up there. On the other side of it, too, I've heard of guys who will be like, I'm going to fly my B team first. And if something gets hit out of that, then, predator cessation,
Yeah.
it's done. And then now I'll fly my A team. But what about this? Are they more likely to hunt mornings, evenings, middle of the day? Is a rhyme or reason to the time they're out?
Yeah, birds of prey are somewhat lazier than some birds. I mean, they're not up at the crack of dawn like the dawn chorus, where you get the robins and other thrushes and warblers all singing, almost to the crack of dawn. Birds of prey will get up a little bit later than that. But I'd say late morning would probably be peak hunting time. But, if they're not successful in getting something, they're going to keep on hunting till they do. But the good thing about peregrines and Cooper's hawks and other birds of prey is that they're not like weasels. They don't go and just kill for the fun of it. They basically kill to feed themselves. Now, whether they just eat, I know peregrines will feed on the breast meat and so on and leave actually a certain telltale ring of bones. You can almost tell a peregrine kill by the way the bird is left, but they love the breast meat or whatever. Owls, for example, will rip the heads off and eat that before anything else. I have another thing you were asking me earlier about what can you do to keep a Cooper's hawk or even a peregrine from coming near your loft, say if you're on the top of a building or something, or even not, maybe just on a farm area or whatever. And that's putting up a hot wire perch. Now I hadn't thought of that before, but I was just looking at some pictures a little while ago where you put up a high pole with a perch on it. I don't know all the details about how to make these, but you could use solar to power it. And basically it gives a mild jolt of electricity to anything sitting on there. Now, the reason that might work for a bird of prey is they often like to survey their surroundings before they decide to make a kill or whatever. So if you put up a pole with some kind of a T-perch on the top that's got some kind of wiring on it, that you don't want to fry the bird because that's illegal, but a small jolt of electricity, and the details, you could find them on the internet because I found them, and I thought that was a very interesting possibility as a solution to make it, because once the bird of prey lands in that, and every time it lands, it gets a mild jolt, it's going to say, yeah, this is not a good place. I'll go hunt somewhere else. So that might work.
I never heard of that. Now I have heard of guys putting up a pole with a platform on it for their birds to kind of come down quick as like a hopping point, come down and then get in the loft, come down, give them a spot if they don't have a spot, if
Yeah.
there's nothing around, instead of just coming in hot right to the loft, they'll put that up there and train the birds that way too. But I've never heard one for that.
I think another thing too, Philip, is that when someone's feeding birds in their backyard, like I do, for example, if you don't want hawks to nail your birds, then you should make sure that there's some cover nearby, not cover to allow cats to hide in, mind you, but cover so that they can dive into the cover in a hurry. And Cooper's hawks are so smart that, and I know this for a fact, that they'll sometimes come in out of nowhere. They're ambush predators. They'll just sit and wait. And then as soon as they see the flock building up on the feeders, they come dashing in. And of course, the flock scatters, and often they hit windows. And then they're easy prey for the Cooper's hawk to go and grab one. There have even been
Wow.
cases where a Cooper's hawk has chased a bird into the window, and both the Cooper's hawk and the bird they were chasing died from smacking the window. I mean, billions of birds get killed hitting windows, but that apparently has become a bit of a hunting technique for Cooper's hawks, and maybe they've grown to understand the windows a little bit better. I mean, all this to say is that if you have a pigeon loft, having the loft is the place to escape, obviously. But for the hawks, you do not want to give them any kind of a vantage point unless it's a hot wire perch. You don't want to give them any kind of a vantage where they can hide. So getting rid of any places where a Cooper's hawk could hide and ambush your birds as they're coming into the loft to me is a no-brainer.
So, can you offer any other type of advice to promote a safe environment for the pigeons against the presence of birds of prey?
I've worked with drones for 13 years, studying the use of drones to study wildlife. Counting falcons, babies in the nest, counting shorebirds in a flock, nesting birds, and all sorts of different things. And I was trying to think of some way that one might use this interesting technology to help. But the problem is that there are many cases that drones end up annoying peregrine falcons and other birds of prey so much, not necessarily Cooper's hawks, but certainly peregrines. The peregrines will actually attack the drones and knock them out of the
Oh
sky.
yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, and you can find numerous videos and reports of that on YouTube or whatever. But I was trying to think of a way that you could use a drone somehow. And I know they use them in airports, for example, where they actually look like a bird of prey. And that's nothing new. That was done in the 60s by Transport Canada, where they had a remote controlled airplane that looked like a goshawk and tried that. But the problem is that the prey birds, the ducks and the gulls and so on, they habituate to a drone that doesn't kill them. After a while, they say, "Oh, here comes that noisy machine again." But let's not bother leaving because it's not going to do anything to us. And so the idea of using falconry at airports, occasionally you put the drone out there, and then occasionally you throw in the live falcon and it kills something. So they never know, oh, is that the live falcon coming or is it the drone? And I just read somewhere, this is brand new to me, that they're actually using drones to herd birds away from the runways at airports. So I was trying to think, could you use a drone somehow to herd a raptor away from your pigeon flocks? But that's very intensive and so on. Oh, there is one more thing that I think is worth trying. I know for a fact, and this has not been published to my knowledge, that birds do not like green laser beams. I'm not talking about red ones or whatever, but green ones. They don't like green laser beams. And you can go on the internet, Philip, and look at type in laser beams helping farmers in California. And so these farmers now that have these problems with starling flocks coming in and eating their berries or their grains or whatever, put up these laser guns on poles on the corners of their crops. And what they do is they just randomly fire off laser beams all over the place. Apparently, it's about 95% effective. So could you put
Wow.
a laser gun on the roof? Now, right away, I know what you're thinking because I'm thinking the same thing. You're probably not going to get permission from the FAA to do that because, I mean, people can get in big trouble, be thrown in jail for firing laser beams off at planes landing in runways and so on, which is the stupidest thing I've heard anyone ever do, but they do it. I don't think it's going to work for pigeon loss, but they are allowed to use them legally in these crops in California. So I would love to put a laser beam on a drone to use to disperse starlings at vineyards, for example. I even suggested in a talk, there was a Transport Canada guy in the audience, and he came to me after, and he says, my boss wants to speak to you. And he said, he says, we are having enough trouble trying to regulate drones, and putting laser beams on them as well is just a bridge too far.
Well, they do have, I've seen those green lasers and they got them like little like pin size ones.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Try to shine it on a BOP if you see one coming around your birds.
And I think it would probably work if you're willing to do that. Spend the time out there. Just carry one in your jacket all the time. And if you see a falcon or a hawk hanging around the area, then give it a shot. And you're not going to hurt the bird in any way. It's just going to be annoyed by it and leave. Bird watchers actually use either red or green laser beams to point birds out to their clients. They're taking people out. Let's just say I'm trying to show a rare bird in some deep foliage in a jungle to a bunch of bird watchers, whatever. I don't put the laser beam right on the bird. I say, okay, 3 feet to the left of my little laser dot, you'll find the bird we're looking for. Just wiggling it back and forth and flying it and shooting it toward a raptor, and it's possible that the bird of prey might think, I don't want to go near Philip Fry's place because he's there's those awful laser beams there. They're pretty smart birds, and they might get it in their heads. I'll go bother David Bird's pigeons instead.
Well, I mean, yeah, this is good. You've given a lot of like practical things that people can try, and it's going to be based on, like you said, what kind of bird of prey you're dealing with, and what you're
Yep.
in the city, you're in the country. But you've given a lot of really good ideas.
Well, there's actually, Philip, one other group of birds I haven't mentioned yet, and that's owls. In the cities, the main owls that you got to watch out for pigeon fanciers, I think, would be certainly great horned owls, which are the most common owl. They're the big ones with the ear tufts sticking straight up. And there's another owl now that's found all over North America called barred owls, but they don't tend to take pigeons all that much. They're more of a mouse and a rabbit eater than anything. And then you've got barn owls, and barn owls have been known to actually go into lofts, kill pigeons inside a loft as well, because they can get into. I mean, they nest in holes, so they're able to do that sort of thing. So those guys, as I said, putting up those fake owls, not going to do anything for them at all. That's a more difficult problem. I don't know how often that happens. Have you lost any pigeons to owls yourself?
Not the owls, no.
I don't think it's as significant a problem as it is with the Cooper's hawks, which do love pigeon-sized birds. I got to tell you one last little funny story. I have this modest house down in Baja, Mexico, that I spend the winters down there, and I feed the birds in the backyard. And I actually get a flock in of roughly about 30 to 40, as many as 50 white-winged doves. They're the most common dove, like pigeon-like bird there. And I deliberately throw out handfuls of chicken scratch to them and bring them in so that I can attract the local Cooper's hawk to come in and entertain me with taking one of those things. It hasn't worked yet, but I have had Cooper's hawks come in and scare the heck out of those doves. So it just makes good theater for me.
Like I told you, I belong to the Arizona State Pigeon Club, and in our club, there's multiple falconers. They're not just there to get the cold birds either. They're bird people.
Yep, they love birds.
We like watching them and doing their thing and stuff like that. And there's got to be, like you say, there has to be a balance. You don't even want to mess around with shooting these things. They're federally protected. There's other ways. We just went over a ton of different things that you could do that are legal.
I'm not saying that any of those things I've suggested will necessarily work, but they're worth experimenting with at least.
Right. Yeah.
And I love problems like this. If I had a grant, I mean, I'm getting a little bit long in the tooth now, unfortunately. I'm not taking on any more students. I'm still a professor at McGill, emeritus. That's what that means. But I love problems like this. But I suspect that probably each situation is somewhat different. I mean, maybe you might be in a city where there's a lot of peregrines around. LA is one of them, of course. Chicago, New York City are loaded with peregrine falcons, and all the major cities in Canada have them. Or you might be in another area where you've got to worry about Cooper's hawks and not peregrines. And so every situation is going to be a little different. I think things worth trying to summarize would be the use of those guinea fowl, if you don't mind having extra mouths to feed. The laser pen might work. The mannequins and blow up effigies that just every once in a while they blow up or whatever might make a peregrine think twice about going anywhere near your loft, or a Cooper's hawk. Those are the things that I think I would try before anything else. Another thing you might try is you can buy these coyote decoys. They're full-size decoys. I've seen them placed in fields to keep geese away. And I know that birds of prey do not like coyotes. Another animal you could get or you could make would be a raccoon. They do not like raccoons. And another thing they don't like are snakes. And I noticed there's an article showing that people that are keeping poultry and other birds, and maybe pigeon fanciers as well, could have a snake hanging on a wire, not a coiled snake, but one that looks like it's moving, and have it move around in the wind. And apparently they do not like that either, and neither do owls for that matter. So you might want to think about that one.
Well, these are all great. And David, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing some of this with us. You can check out Professor David Bird's website at askprofessorbird.com. He has a lot of information on there about all the stuff that he does. David, thanks for coming on and talking with us. It's been great.
It's my great pleasure, Philip. And I wish you the very best, and may your pigeons be safe.
Absolutely. Thank you.